Have you ever wondered what would happen if Zoro was reborn with his memories and power? What changes would he make? And how would he reshape the world of One Piece? To set the tone, the Straw Hat Pirates stormed the Holy Land of Mary Joyce, and their journey across every sea had brought them to the throne room at the heart of the world's rod, where Imu sat waiting, and the five elders stood transformed into something ancient and terrible. The crew fought like they always did, with everything they had and then some, but the walls closed in anyway. Zoro faced Nusjuro, clashing swords in a duel that shook the throne room floor. He activated King of Hell and poured his conqueror's haki through Enma until the blade screamed with it. But Imu moved between the battles like a ghost, appearing and disappearing, and when Luffy left an opening for just one moment, Zoro stepped into it. He took the blow meant for his captain, because he always does. The darkness came in fast, and Zoro's last thought before it took him entirely was not of the fight, it was the promise. The one he made to a girl at a dojo on a night they both agreed the world wasn't big enough for both of their dreams, and the dream he had carried for her ever since she was supposed to die and didn't get to. Then he spoke up on the floor of Ishin Dojo, hardwood planks and the smell of rice and old sweat, with a bokken in his hand that was suddenly too light and wrapped in fingers that were suddenly too small. Zoro sat up slowly and looked at his hands. 7 years old, maybe 8, but his mind was completely intact. Every opponent he had ever fought, every technique he had ever broken his body learning, every conversation Mihawk and him had ever had on the island during 2 years of training that nearly killed him, all of it sitting inside the skull of a child. He understood immediately what had happened, and he understood immediately what it meant. The problem was physics, because a child's body cannot produce what an adult body builds across years of extreme training. Muscle memory is physical, not mental, and the knowledge of how to do something and the body that can execute it are two completely different things. His mind knew the King of Hell, but his arms could barely hold a real sword steady, which meant he was going to have to rebuild everything from scratch starting right now, and the only advantage of knowing exactly what he was building toward. So he stood up, picked up the bokken, and got to work, because there was nothing else to do and no reason to waste time doing anything else first. Here is where the story changes forever, and I mean that literally. In the original One Piece, Kuina, Zoro's greatest rival at the dojo and the girl he made his most important promise with, died falling down a staircase in a freak accident that was completely senseless. That moment shaped Roronoa Zoro into everything he became, because he spent the rest of his life chasing a dream that was also a tribute to someone he couldn't save. This time though, Zoro knows the exact day it happens, knows which staircase, and knows what time. So he is there when she falls, and he catches her. Kuina lives, and that single moment rewrites every version of Zoro that follows. She doesn't understand what changed in him, and she only knows that the boy she used to beat every single day has become someone she cannot beat anymore. Someone who fights with a stillness that doesn't belong to a child his age. Their rivalry doesn't disappear because of this either, and if anything, it sharpens since Kuina trains harder because she can't accept falling behind, while Zoro trains harder because he knows what's coming and how much it's going to take. The two prodigies in the same dojo, and one of them is secretly running a decade ahead of where he's supposed to be. When the time finally comes for Zoro to leave, Kuina does something nobody expected by taking Wado Ichimonji, her sword, and the blade that was supposed to be buried with her, and putting it in his hands herself. She tells him it belongs with the one who's going to carry the promise to the top of the world, and it's not her giving up, but rather her making a bet on him. Zoro takes the sword without saying a word, because he doesn't need to. Now here is something the story has to reckon with honestly, because the timeline math matters. Zoro is reborn at 7 or 8 years old, but Luffy doesn't set sail until he's 17, which means there's almost a decade of a full conscious, fully aware Roronoa Zoro existing in the East Blue with nowhere to be yet. That gap is both a gift and a danger at the same time. The gift is obvious because it's time, and Zoro uses every single year of it. He trains before the sun comes up and after it goes down, though he doesn't have Enma yet since the sword is inside a closed country on the other side of the world that isn't opening its borders for anyone. And he doesn't have the Sandai Kitetsu either since the blade is sitting in a barrel at a weapon shop in Logtown he hasn't reached. So he works with basic katanas and Wado Ichimonji, grinding his growing body toward the level his mind has already mapped out. The danger on the other hand is visibility, because a 12-year-old who takes down adult bounty targets without breaking a sweat is going to draw exactly the kind of attention Zoro cannot afford right now. He manages this deliberately by keeping no high-profile bounties, making no sense, and making sure no report of an impossibly skilled child swordsman ever reaches a desk that matters, since the last thing he needs is an admiral showing up to investigate a kid before Luffy has even left Fusha village. By the time Luffy set sail, Zoro is 17 with 9 years of his body catching up to his mind. He's not yet at the peak of what his first life built, since that took the full journey and 2 years under Mihawk, but he is significantly ahead of where the original Zoro stood at the same age, and he is ready. The first meeting happens at Morgan's Marine Base, where Zoro knows from his first life that Luffy came to that base and found him tied to a post. But since the timeline has already changed, he cannot know the exact day Luffy will arrive. What he can do is keep watching in a general area and wait. So he camps near the base perimeter for a few days, training until the day Luffy's distinctive presence announces itself through the chaos erupting inside the compound. Zoro walks in behind him, and Luffy turns around to find a swordsman standing there who has clearly been waiting for him. Zoro tells him he'll join the crew before Luffy can even open his mouth, and Luffy stares at him for 3 full seconds because he had just decided in his head that this was going to be his first crew member, and somehow the guy already knew. They handle the Morgan situation together. Luffy punches and Zoro cuts, and it's over in under a minute, and then Luffy spends the entire rest of the day pestering Zoro about what the mystery cook he mentioned makes best, because some things never change. The crew builds from there, with Nami, Usopp, and Sanji joining in turn, and by the time they reach Logtown, the last port before the Grand Line, Zoro already knows exactly what he's walking into. He takes the crew to the weapon shop, finds the barrel, and pulls out the Sandai Kitetsu, while already knowing the blade is cursed and already knowing exactly how to make the curse back down. He tosses it in the air and lets it fall, and it lands precisely where he decides to let it land while the shopkeeper stares. And then Zoro takes the sword and walks out without any ceremony. And then Mihawk arrives at the Barati, which is the moment the alternate timeline breaks most dramatically from the original. When Zoro challenges Dracul Mihawk, the dynamic is completely different from their first encounter, because even though Zoro cannot win this fight since his body is still years away from matching what his mind already carries, he doesn't fight like someone who has never seen Mihawk move. He fights like someone who spent 2 years watching Mihawk fight at full speed from 10 feet away, and that knowledge lives in his head even if it hasn't been forged into his muscles yet. What unsettles Mihawk is not the technique, but rather that Zoro seems to already know where the attacks are going before they arrive, like someone who has run this fight in their head 1,000 times, which is exactly what has happened. Mihawk stops before a decisive blow lands and asks Zoro one question about who told him how he fights, and Zoro tells him that nobody did, and that he just paid attention, which is the whole truth, even if it doesn't sound like it. Mihawk sheets Yoru and watches the Straw Hat sail away with an expression nobody on that ship can read, and while he doesn't offer to train Zoro yet, he does not forget this encounter either. Meanwhile, before the crew enters the Grand Line, something else happens at Logtown when Kuina arrives at the dock. She tracks Zoro through the East Blue using her father's contacts and the trail his bounty hunting reputation left behind. Since the East Blue is small enough that following a swordsman from port to port is feasible if you know which direction he's moving and you're willing to be stubborn about it. And Logtown being the last stop before the Grand Line was always the obvious destination for someone heading toward the greatest swordsman in the world. She finds Zoro at the dock and looks at him without any particular warmth before informing him that the deal they made still stands, that one of them is going to become the world's greatest swordsman, and that she intends to be there when it happens, which means she needs to be wherever he's going. Luffy tells her she can come, but doesn't even ask anyone's opinion about it. And Zoro doesn't say anything because he already knew she was coming, and has been hoping she would since the day he left the dojo. Through Alabasta, Zoro's foreknowledge proves most useful, not in the fights but in the positioning, since he knows which buildings have traps, knows which of Vivi's allies to trust, and keeps the crew out of the wrong places at the wrong times so that when the palace collapses, nobody important is standing where they shouldn't be. Through Skypiea, Zoro uses the isolation of the island to push his hockey development by training against the warrior beasts of the upper yard and grinding his body toward the level his mind is mapping for him. And while he doesn't interfere with Luffy's fight against Enel, since the matchup belongs to Luffy always, the arc confirms to him that he's meaningfully ahead of where he was the first time at this point in the journey. Water 7 and Eni's lobby hit just as hard the second time around, even though Zoro knew Robin would be taken and knew CP9 was coming. Knowing does not make watching it happen easy, and when Robin finally chooses to live and actually says the words out loud, it means exactly as much to him as it did the first time, because some things are not made smaller by expectation and are simply confirmed as real. Wano comes in its own time, and Enel cannot be taken early since the country is sealed behind waterfalls and hostile waters, while the sword belongs to Kozuki Hiyori, who has no reason to part with her father's blade for a stranger. Zoro knows this and doesn't try to shortcut it because some things have to be earned, and he earns it the same way as the first time by bleeding for Wano, fighting for its people, and proving he's worth a sword. What changes is the moment he picks it up, because in the original timeline, Enma nearly killed him the first time by draining his haki without warning, and he had no way to respond, spending weeks in a near-death loop trying not to fight the drain. This time, the moment Enma begins to pull, Zoro doesn't resist, since he already knows what the mechanism is, and feeds it deliberately, controlling the outflow from the first moment so that what took weeks of damage the first time takes only days. His King of Hell form stabilizes, and he can hold it. And while the fight with King is still intense, since King doesn't go down with a proper war, it is not the edge of death reckoning it was the first time around, and Zoro defeats him cleanly and decisively. In Elbaf, Zoro meets Scoper Gaban, one of Roger's former crew, who has been guiding fighters toward controlled Conqueror's haki, and revealing that a specific advanced application of it, targeting the soul rather than the body, is the only only way to permanently harm immortal beings like the Holy Knights, the Five Elders, and Imo. When they meet, Zoro already knows the board shape of what Gaban is going to tell him, so he asks Gaban to confirm the details and correct whatever he's gotten wrong from memory. And Gaban, who is not a man easily surprised, is surprised when he asks how Zoro already knows this. Zoro tells him the truth and all of it. His death, the darkness, waking up on the dojo floor, making Gaban the first person outside Kuina he has told directly. Gaban laughs and then trains Zoro harder than he would have otherwise, telling him that if he already knows where the road ends, then there's no reason to be careful about how fast he runs it. When the war on Elbaf begins and Dory turns against his own people, enslaved and barely himself, Zoro cuts through the binding with Conqueror's haki aimed directly at the soul. Not to harm Dory, but to sever Imu's thread of control in a way that is surgical, precise, and exactly what the technique was built for. Dory is free, and the giants of Elbaf watch a human swordsman free their co-captain using nothing but the will in his blade without any of them knowing what to make of him, while Kuina watches from the edge of the battlefield and has known exactly what to make of him since they were children. Before the final war, Zoro seeks out Mihawk not to take the title yet since the timing isn't right, and he won't take something in the middle of a war, but to say what the original Zoro never got to say. He tells Mihawk that everything he carried into every fight in the second life was built on a foundation Mihawk laid in the first one, and that 2 years on Kuraigana Island were the most important 2 years he ever lived. Mihawk listens and then picks up Yoru and tells him that acknowledgement without a sword in hand is just words. So they fight, and for the first time it is genuinely close. Mihawk wins, but only barely, and he tells Zoro when it's over that the next time they meet it will be different. Zoro picks up his swords and walks back toward the Sunny, where Kuina is waiting at the ramp, having watched the whole thing, and she doesn't say anything because she doesn't need to. The march on Mary Joyce comes again with the Straw Hats, the Revolutionary Army, and the Allied fleets. Luffy in gear 5th, all 5 elders waiting, and Imu at the throne. This time the crew is not walking in blind. Zoro has already died in this room once and knows where Imu appears, knows which moment cost them everything the first time, and has spent his entire second life making sure nobody is standing in that spot when it comes. The crew is positioned correctly. The openings have been planned for, and the traps have been accounted for. He takes his position as Kuina takes hers. The first time she has stood in a battle with stakes this high, and she doesn't flinch even slightly. The swords are ready, and the dream that started in a small dojo between 2 children who swore one of them would reach the top of the world is at its final chapter. Make sure to subscribe and smash the like button for more One Piece videos.